Good afternoon. How's everyone doing? Thank you for taking the time out of your busy schedule to join us at Advantage as we share with you what they expect during a SPD clinical assessment. My name is Jhmeid Billingslea, and I am the managing director for surgical services with Advantage Support Services. One of the things that I do in my role is I go to sites and conduct clinical assessments, either in preparation for accreditation or in preparation for process improvement. I like to do both of them. I have extensive experience. At this point, I've done over 80 of these clinical assessments, and I wanted to share with you what you should expect during your clinical assessment, both from your internal team and if you bring a third party in to conduct this clinical assessment. The objectives of this presentation is to help you justify the need for clinical assessments, review the types of clinical assessments and members of the audit team and the pros and cons of each group, discuss preparation steps, and talk about some point of interest for administrative, educational, and compliance in each area. Then we're going to give you information on sharing CMS mandated QAPI programs, which is one of those things that if you have a CMS inspection, they're always going to want to see. And it's one of those things that whether you're DMV, uh, Joint Commission, AAA, HC, they are wanting to see what you're doing as your quality program, and then also give you some recommendations for reporting and action plans and follow up after the clinical assessment. Again, whether it's from your internal team or from a third party. And then we'll have QAs. Now, speaking of questions and answers, if you have any questions at any point in this presentation, you don't have to wait to the end. Please type in your questions and we will answer them during the presentation, and or if it's a really good juicy question, we'll answer it after the presentation as well. So thank you for participating and being interactive. Disclosure of interest. This is an informational workshop sponsored by Advantage Support Services. Advantage does provide interim staffing, leadership, education, and clinical assessments. The speaker, Jhmeid Billingslea, myself, is employed by Advantage as a clinical assessment expert. This is not a solicitation or advertisement of services, and the information contained herein is applicable to all providers of clinical assessment. So whether it's you're using this to really get your internal team going or better or optimized, or if you have a third party assessment coming from another company, make sure that they're giving you uh, what we're recommending in this presentation. Justification for continuous clinical assessments. The key word in this is continuous clinical assessments. So that's why it's not an either or whether you do an internal or third party. The best practice is to combine the both of them so that the third party can look at the things that you can't see and that the internal can continue to do clinical assessments up to time for accreditation and more importantly to improve patient safety, right? Did you know that 70% of all accreditation surveys result in a finding for healthcare facilities sterile processing? So that means it's high likelihood that you're going to get a finding, and no one wants to get a finding, whether you're a sterile processing leader or a surgical services leader, because a finding puts your accreditation in jeopardy, and you don't want to find yourself in that situation. Add to that the alarming trend of accreditation challenges being reported in the national media. All you have to do is Google news, sterile processing accreditation problems. And so this is a trend that we want to kind of work through and optimize our efforts. According to Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, CMS, who's the deeming authority for all surveys. So I know I'm preaching to the choir a little bit, but just a reminder, no matter which accreditation that you're using, they're all deemed by CMS. So they have to follow the CMS rules. And one of the things that we do is we reference the CMS um, recommendations in this presentation, because no matter which accreditation you're using, they all have to fall in line with the CMS recommendations and requirements. And so the purpose of accreditation surveys is not to get you in trouble. It's really to protect patients by ensuring that the facilities and the providers they are in comply with the established health and safety standards, right? And the challenge is not just to be in compliance. CMS exact wording is to demonstrate compliance. And one of the benefits of doing accreditation rounds and preparation is that now your team is not nervous and they can demonstrate their compliance, not just try to aim for it, right? Multiple studies have shown that the repetition of tasks can lead to significant improvements in performance. So again, part of what we recommend that you do is, whether you do a third party or not, is you do this on a frequent basis, right? What is a frequent basis? Is it a month? Is it a quarter? I think once you get beyond doing it quarterly, you start losing the impact. In my time working in facilities, one of the things that I used to enjoy before I came into leadership is all the process improvements you made when you were preparing for your accreditation survey. Well, you can replicate that by doing these frequent surveys with a third party and with your internal team, because you get that kind of bump of, yeah, we know we shouldn't be doing this. Let's start doing it the right way. How do I determine if my facility needs a clinical assessment? Well, one of the things is, do you want to improve your facility's readiness, reduce anxiety, and define roles in preparation for an upcoming accreditation visit? One of the complaints that I get from people in the industry is when they hire third parties, they're not professional, they're intimidating, they're not sharing. And one of the things that you should require is that your third party assessment team is collaborative, because it's not their job to make the people feel bad about what they're doing or not doing. Because what we found is over 90% of the things that teams are doing wrong, they had no idea that they were doing wrong. So it needs to be collaborative, and that can help reduce the anxiety, so that when it's really time for your survey, you're like, they're not even as tough as Nancy from accreditation. So that's kind of what we want to help you with. If you think it's important to identify gaps between your practice, your facility's policy, and industry standards. So you have to know all three of those. And not just you as a leader have to know that, you have to make sure that your team can access those policies and understand what the statement of intent, which is what a policy is for your practice. The last thing is, I think my organization needs a boost to sustain the CQI process, right? And the key word in the CQI process is the continuous, right? You can't just do rounds once a year and think that those things are going to stick. By doing it more frequently, by making an action plan of things that you find, that's going to help you to success. And also make sure that you don't have a finding on something that you had a finding before, or that some of the things that you improved 2 years before your accreditation don't slip before your next accreditation visit. So let's talk about types of SPD clinical assessments, right? You have accreditation surveys conducted by CMS or a deemed agency. If you are using a surveyor or an accreditation body that's not listed, please type that in, because we like to know so that we can become more familiar with them and see what their style is. So you have Joint Commission, DMV, CIHQ, AAAHC, and they're all following CMS standards, and that's what we're going to use in this presentation. Internal compliance surveys. This is what I love. That's when members of the organization self-audit practices and policies in all areas of the instrument cycle. And then you have third party. Third-party surveys are conducted by subject matter experts for accreditation readiness or quality improvement purposes. One of the things that's key there is subject matter experts. And we want to talk about how you qualify your subject matter experts when you get a third party survey. So the types of assessors that we're going to discuss in this presentation, we're going to talk about internal auditors, which should be your most frequent option. We're going to talk about the third party auditors or assessors. We're not going to talk as much about accreditation surveyors because we can't impose our expectations on accreditation surveyors. What we can be is prepared if they point out something that we don't necessarily agree with. We're not gonna fight them during the survey, but we can prepare our evidence so that on that last report out day, we can say, well, you said that the sky is pink. Here's the evidence that the sky is blue. And that's more successful than saying, no, the sky is blue. You're wrong. But again, when we're talking about our expectations, we're going to set our expectations for the team members that we can control. So who are those team members? Typically, the accreditation surveyors consists of a smaller group of people, right? Physicians, nurses, hospital administrators, and environmental of care / life safety experts, right? The internal accreditation surveys operate from an interdisciplinary team. And if that's not a focus of your interdisciplinary / multidisciplinary team, you should make it a focus, right? And so it typically consists of a physician champion, C-suite sponsor, OR leadership, SPD leaders, infection preventionists, key part of it, accreditation services, environmental services, plant operations, and ad hoc teams as needed. A quick comment about the accreditation services. If you are attending this survey or if you partner with accreditation services, sometimes accreditation services is a great thing to have. If your facility is big enough to have accreditation services, that's great. One of the things you want to make sure of is that whether it's a third party survey or an internal survey, let's make sure that accreditation services is not focused on making excuses for things that are not being done the proper way, right? So that's one of the dangers that sometimes accreditation services gets into, because for an actual accreditation survey, that's literally their job to battle the findings. But for your internal and third party surveys, that's not a good thing, because again, when you get your actual survey, that may be be a barrier to process improvement. And a third party accreditation, it's performed by surgical services subject matter experts with demonstrated, keyword demonstrated, knowledge of industry regulations, standards, and guidelines, right? So the pros and cons of the different surveys. Obviously, accreditation surveys, we have to do those, right? And it's objective rating of the organization's level of compliance and patient care. The cons is expensive. That's one of those things that we don't realize. When you have a finding on an accreditation survey, when they come back to revisit, that's a charge. When CMS comes in, that's a charge. And hiccups on this survey can jeopardize the organization's accreditation status. And unfortunately, as we talked about before, land on the front page of the news. Internal, this is my favorite. It's a unifying method to improve quality. It fosters interdepartmental collaboration, reduces the siloing in the goal of improving patient care, and it helps you excel during accreditation visits. One of the cons of doing internal surveys is that all these team members have other jobs and daily responsibilities, and that might be a barrier to them becoming a subject matter expert, like deep diving into the standards, the regulations, and the guidelines, right? Because if you reference any of these in your your policy, then you have to make sure that you're in line with all those. The other thing to know that the CMS references AMI when it comes to sterile processing standards. Let me say that again, because I hear people going, well, we don't have to do AMI. The CMS references AMI. So when you say, well, we're not doing AMI, CMS is already saying, and you can look at the reference, it says specifically that refer to AMI ST79, refer to AMI ST91. So make sure that you understand that. The third party, The surveyors are SMEs whose jobs are to prepare and gather information from industry regulations. Ideally, they sit on the AMI standards committees that write these standards so that they have a head start on interpreting those standards. They're members of organizations like AORN, AST from the surgical tech perspective, CSA from the surgical assistant perspective. So, and the positives and the negatives when it comes to process improvement, because they have experience implementing and helping organizations come into compliance, right? Now, what's the biggest barrier? Why doesn't everybody run out and say, let's get a third party survey every week, every month, every quarter? I'm a realist. I know that they're not free, right? But again, you don't need those third party surveys every quarter. You can get a third party survey as your baseline to create an action plan, right? So just keep that in mind when you're developing your plan. All right. So let's talk about preparation prior to a clinical assessment, right? The internal clinical assessor should review previous survey results. It's nothing sadder than when an organization takes a conditional finding that really puts their accreditation status in jeopardy, and it's the same finding from the last accreditation visit. So that's key to review previous survey results. Develop and report KPIs that address these challenges directly, right? Meet with transparency and unity. So it shouldn't be a finger pointing or embarrassing meeting as we prepare to do our clinical assessment from the internal. The third party, they should share their CV, certifications, and credentials. Let me say that again. Just because someone works for a company that does clinical assessments, what's their individual experience doing assessments? How many assessments have they performed? How good are they at doing these assessments? Are they on AMI committees? Are they members of AORN? They should deliver an itinerary with flexibility that ensures that operations are not disrupted. I am not doing a favor if I come to do a site visit or a clinical assessment on your busiest ortho day where you have 24 total joints. And I'm like, no, let's stop the presses and so that I can assess what your process is. No, that's not how we should do it. The third party should discuss previous surveys and exchange operational data and policies as appropriate. Some organizations are really, really nervous about giving third party assessors their policies, and that's understandable. But it's really critical that third party assessor has access to your policy so they can say, see, are you doing what you're saying you're doing? Because that is a common finding, that you're not necessarily doing something that's against regulation standards or guidelines. You're just doing something different than what you said you're going to do. Also, you want to discuss expectations from both sides and make the facility team comfortable. And that's where, again, we're talking about the professionalism. The third party assessment should not feel like some difficult process that you went through. It should feel like a process improvement project that everybody is working together on. Accreditation surveyors, one of the things that CMS came out with in 2023 is we're not going to tell you when we're coming. And although you typically get a little warning still, it's not in the old days where they go, hey, in 3 weeks, we'll be there in Fargo. No, that's not a part of that. So you have to stay ready for accreditation surveyors. So expectations for arrival and commencements of the assessment. The assessment team should arrive and don proper PPE. One of my pet peeves is that we should not wear bunny suits during surveys. And the references are on this document, but bunny suits are not environmentally friendly. They're expensive if you're in charge of buying them. And also, because of the heat that they generate, are you getting a detailed survey, right? Now, I'm not going to say it's great when accreditation surveyors wear bunny suits, but when you're paying for somebody to give you an assessment, they should be in scrubs so they can take their time. They're not motivated by the uncomfortability of the bunny suits. You should have a quick introduction to the staff. No one should come in and just start surveying people without an introduction, because the staff is like, hey, look, I'm working here. Who is this guy? Sometimes in a bunny suit or sometimes in scrubs. Um, and they should share a checklist so that we can provide a receipt for our action plan. So, and we'll talk about that. And that's not just third party, that's internal as well, because even though accreditation may be known to you as a surgical services leader, infectious preventionist, the staff may not know who those team members are, right? You always want to start on the clean side. If someone starts in decon, they're already telling you they don't understand the proper instrument cycle, right? Because you should always end in decon. And yes, we know that, well, if your scrubs are not soiled, you don't have to necessarily change. But also, we know that Corey Ofsted's study showed that aerosolization can go out as far as 7 feet. So we don't want to cross contaminate our clean areas, even though we don't have visible soiling. And so Corey Offset study should really change the way we think about going from decon to the clean side, because that's a great study, and we can share that with you. If you want to see Corey Offset studies, please let us know in the chat, because we can share that study with you. And it really changed the way we survey and think about things. Observations should take precedence over oral explanations. Now, what does that mean? You telling me what you do when vendor trays come in is not the same as me observing you do what you do. Because sometimes I tell you what I do, and sometimes I don't do the things that I tell you. So observations should take precedence. Also, the more observations you do, the less interruption of the process you have, right? So if I can watch you do the tray and see if you use function testing, see if you do quality inspections, see if you do all those things that are recommended by Amy, CMS, and all those groups, then that's better than me saying, so tell me how you process this tray, right? Questions should be tailored to the level of the employee's responsibility. Here's a great example. Please show me how you access manufacturer's instructions for use. Versus, you don't have IFUs on each desktop in the workstation. Well, that's not a staff member's responsibility level, right? You can observe that they don't have IFUs available on every computer, but that's a SPD leadership opportunity for improvement, not that. And again, we have references for the bunny suits so that you can make sure that you use those. Again, I'm not pro bunny suits for internals. Assessors and third-party assessors don't have as much of a problem with accreditation assessment. All right, expectations for the clean side, right? This is not an exhaustive list of everything that you should be doing. These are just some of the things that we want to make sure that are in the forefront of when we're looking at it, right? And if you notice, we're starting on the clean side, not in decon, right? In the instrument cycle. And again, if you look at the bottom of this page, you have the CMS hospital infection sections that go with everything that we're mentioning here, right? So the assessment should evaluate acceptance versus rejection criteria from the washer. What does that mean? How many trays get sent back? Because we know that trays get sent back from the OR. So if our culture is not, we can reject a tray that comes through that wasn't run on the right cycle, that didn't have the items disassembled. That's a quality step, right? And a lot of instrument tracking systems can help you track that, right? So that's actually a good thing if you reject things. Single-use and non-medical device elimination compliance. Spoons are great from the cafeteria. I did cysto when I was scrubbing a little bit, and man, spoons are crucial for cysto cases, but you have to make sure you have a medical grade spoon. If you don't, then now you just turned yourself into an FDA reprocessing center, so you have a bigger problems than just that accreditation visit. IFU access, that's everywhere, right? And compliance for instrument identification and marking, when we're talking about tape, or laser etching, whatever method you're using. Do a risk evaluation on, is it worth it to have this tape or this dip, because when it starts going bad, it can be a low hanging fruit for accreditation surveyors. That's one of those things you want to look at from the risk. Do you have magnified visual inspection on both sides, but specifically at the workstations? The magnified lights, a lot of times, every workstation has magnified lights, and every one of them has those lights turned off. Are you doing insulation testing as recommended by AMI? And do you have attestations that can prove that you're doing it? Are you disassembling instruments? How do you select the chemical indicator? Are you using the minimal chemical indicator? The AMI recommends that the minimal chemical indicator for all types is 4. So make sure that you don't have type 1 chemical indicators that you're using in your trays. Packaging, cleaning, verification, selection, inspection, and proper application. Are you using the best packaging? Is that packaging validated for the sterilization method that you use? Package and pill pack specific labeling. You can't have general pill pack 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 from a patient tracing and patient tracking. If a patient gets an infection, then we want to be able to prove that all of our cycles were run properly and all our techniques were proper. And then communication and prioritization with the OR. What? That's an accreditation thing. CMS specifically talks about that. How do you communicate? Because CMS likes to see documentation. And it's really a good thing to be able to prove to surgery, this is how we communicate with the OR, do our scheduling planning for tomorrow to make sure that we reduce IUSS and loads with short dry cycles, which have to be documented just like IUSS. So an advanced tip is attestations of tasks such as demagnification of delicate instruments, installation testing, borescope inspections are a key part of a CMS mandated quality program. And we're going to talk about that a little bit later on, but these are the things that are in that quality program. And that's how you can use your count sheet and your instrument tracking system to ensure that your team is doing all the things that, one, they're being asked to do by accreditation standards, but also the things that lead to better products and patient care. Expectations for the sterilization review, right? Make sure that we have the availability of the sterilizer operator's manual. Can your off shifts do troubleshooting on their own, or do they have to call you or the vendor, the repair vendor in? One of the most frustrating things is when a vendor comes in and it's just a 1, 2, 3 blip, blop, bloop, and it's right there in your sterilization manual as a troubleshooting time. And so you go like, well, that's what we're paying them for. That's true, but how did it impact patient care to go from 3 sterilizers to 2 sterilizers during that time that you're waiting for that repair specialist to come in? IFU access again, and how do you make sure that every item is going in the right sterilization method, and also is it going in the right load parameters, right? Is it the right dry time? Is it the right sterilization exposure time? Load building rejection criteria. Does your sterilizer, the person assigned a sterilizer, have the ability and have a check sheet to say, listen, I need you to rewrap this tray. It's just not neat. Wrap is too loose. I need you to relabel this tray. It doesn't have the details that we need. Are you performing daily sterilizer vacuum testing when you're using steam, chamber drain cleaner, biological indicator compatibility, testing performance and documentation, right? The cooling and load release criteria. Can your team say these are the load criteria factors as recommended by AMI, right? And who's doing the sterilization record quality audits? One of our clients had a great supervisor there. She was really great. But every Thursday she was in her office for like 6 hours. And I was like, what are you doing? She's like, I'm checking all the loads for the week. Well, 1, that's too late, right? And 2, that's not empowering your team. CMS is they are going to go through every record that you have with a fine tooth comb, and you want to be prepared and ready to go. And again, there's that communication piece that's a part of the CMS requirements for needed trays, IUSS, and short dry cycle load reduction. And recall and wet load algorithm, spell it out. Have a sheet of paper that's laminated that says, if this happens, do this. If this happens, do that. Um, I don't think that's reasonable to ask for your team to memorize that process, or I don't think it's fair for the SPD leadership to get called at home or wherever they are in meetings, wherever they are, every time there's a recall or a wet load. So we want to help empower our teams. One of the tips: regularly scheduled product testing and documentation of sterilizer methods is a key AAMI recommendation for patient safety and quality program. So for both hydrogen peroxide and steam load, you should have product testing done at least on an annual basis that proves all the configurations, all the type of trays that we have been tested. It lays out how to do it in ST79 and ST58. That's why it's important to have ST79 and ST58. And then again, these are spelled out in the CMS infection control worksheets, section 3B, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 17, and 18. All right, let's go to the sterile storage, right? Sterile storage, make sure we're compliant with AAMI recommendations, 18 inches from ceilings or sprinklers, 8 to 10 inches from the floor, solid line bottom shelves away from outside walls. All transport and case cart meet the above standard. So a lot of times we go into places and they're meeting, they have the solid bottom and all that stuff. And then I'm seeing a cart and we just use this to take trays to the OR. But that tray doesn't have a solid bottom. The purpose of the solid bottom, especially for transport carts, is to prevent the aerosolization as the wheels turn over the floor, whether the floor has been mopped or hasn't been mopped, or that's a whole other story. But those microorganisms aerosolize as you push that cart. So you have that nice sterile tray that you spend all that time, and then you're kicking microorganisms right up onto that tray. And so I don't want that to be used on my family. Documented quality audits of sterilized packages, particularly pill pouches, for sterility maintenance compliance, right? So again, that goes to, well, we have event-related sterility. Just because you have event-related sterility doesn't mean that all the packages on your shelf are sterile, right? You have to do quality audits, especially as trays start getting older, because you might have changed the count sheet, you might have changed some of the instrumentation that is in there, you might have changed products, all those kind of things, right? And that goes to our shelf life and use life practices compliant with facility policy. If you don't have a policy for shelf life and use life, you need to develop one. And when you develop that policy, instead of having your team memorize it, print it out, put it in a laminated form, and put it on the carts where you store sterile goods so that your team doesn't have to remember those and say, this is what we do for our shelf life versus use life practices. The OR and clinic site education and compliance. Let me make sure that we know this, because this is one of those things that gets facilities in trouble. The sterile processing leader is responsible for the sterility maintenance of all internally produced items. So that means if I sterilize it, I do the best job, but I never round to the wound clinic, I never round to OB, GYN, I never round to the clinics that we serve. How do I know they're being stored properly? How do I know that the temp and humidity is being monitored properly? How do I know they're being handled? If I'm getting point of use care, point of use treatment that's not adequate, how can we hold that team responsible when we didn't deliver in services? So this is a part of our responsibility, not just in the department that we call sterile processing, but anywhere that sterile goods are stored. Now we're back to decon, right? And you're like, wait a minute, this is not decon. Why do we have a picture of the OR? Because point of use treatment, it's not cleaning instruments. Let's stop using that term, cleaning instruments. Point of use treatment is leaving instruments in the condition of next use. And I can tell you, if I had that Cobb elevator when I was scrubbing and I passed it to a physician who was doing a spine, I was in the military, so they didn't have to be as nice. Um, but you'll be kicked out of the room because that instrument is not in a condition of use. So point of use treatment is not about cleaning the instruments, because it doesn't prevent us from having to clean the instruments when they get the sterile processing, but it's the start of the process as we get the decon. And part of one of the things that accreditation surveyors are looking at is, as a customer in SPD, so you're reverse. You're not the producer. You're the customer now. How are we rating that point of use cleaner? And we'll talk about that. The PPE storage, donning, and doffing. Is the PPE in SPD? We talked about Corey Ofsted's study. If it's 7 feet, if it's within 7 feet of any sink or cleaning area, it's probably contaminated. Quality control testing of all the equipment and the eye wash location and function. Proper use of cleaning implements. If you have 3 brushes and you're doing more than 2 different services, you probably don't have enough brushes, and that's something that you can contact your brush manufacturer and say, can you come do an evaluation so we can figure out what brushes that we need, right? Are we using a 3-sync progression? And if you don't have a 3-sync progression, are you still following the steps of the 3-sync progression as best as possible? And again, that's right in Amy ST79. The cleaning solutions, if you're using automatic dispensers, are you testing those, right? Do you have access and compliance with IFUs? Here's a big one: bioburden risk mitigation, right? And you can get a bioburden risk mitigation audit from several companies. I think that I know one company that does the best. But the important thing is there's more to bioburden than just point of use treatment or bore scopes or scrubbing really hard. It's a combination of steps. Do you have Amy compliant lighting? Do you have manual cleaning, lumen flushing? What's your protocol for ultrasonic? Which items go into the ultrasonic? Are you giving your team the best chance of success? And then do you have washer loading and cycle selection that matches the items that have bioburden? One of the saddest things is when we go into a place that's having problems with bioburden, and instead of washing their ortho items in the washer on the ortho cycle that has extended thermal rinse, extended detergent phase, they're using the regular instrument cycle. So there's several steps that we do for bioburden risk mitigation. Advanced tip: the lack of point of use treatment compliance program. That means, am I rating, not just using my camera to take pictures of the bloodiest, dirtiest stuff, but am I rating compliance with all the things? No sharps, delicate on top of heavy, the case cart properly marked as clean versus dirty, all those elements. That's low-hanging fruit that's now being cited not just as an IC finding, it's being cited as a leadership finding, because APIC, Amy, AORN, the CDC, they all say the same thing about point of use treatment. So if you don't have a program that reduces those, and that we can talk about those numbers specifically with CMS, then you might find yourself with a leadership finding. All right. And then we have good old flexible endoscope, one of my favorite areas. Again, do we have task-specific endoscopic reprocessing training? It's okay for people from SPD to do endoscopes, but they should have not just IFU access, but they should have training on each scope by the vendor, on all the equipment by the vendor, and document that training, right? Is the transportation and point of use treatment identified? Can we determine what's a delayed or enhanced reprocessing? Do we have documented leak testing with the flexure of the scope, right? So not just leak testing by manual, which we can make pass all the time. Do we have compliant brushing, flushing, and rinsing of the endoscope? Do we have proper documentation of automated and manual disinfection, the lock controls, the temperatures, the minimum effective level, and patient information, right? And that goes back to the transportation. If you don't have a sticker during transportation, I don't know how you're going to properly document, whether it's in an AER or a manual process. Internal drying, storing, tagging, and cleaning of storage equipment. And again, that flush that's on an automatic, the AER is not a drying cycle. ST91 makes that clear. And do you have an inventory of all the endoscopes? Because you can be doing it perfect in the area where you reprocess endoscope. But then you find out this clinic has an endoscope that they don't send to you. This place has it. So having a facility-wide inventory also gives you the opportunity to make sure that everybody is compliant. Advanced tip: adding a cleaning verification step to all endoscopes ensures uniform standard of care. ST91 talks about using cleaning verification for scopes that have had a history of having persistent residual infections. But here's the funny thing for those of us who have been in the industry for a while, not old, just been in the industry for a while. One of those things is the stuff that's on the list in 2024 is not the same as the list in 2020. It's not the same as the list in 2016. So I would rather have cleaning verification for all my scopes so that if a scope later that wasn't on the high risk list gets on the high risk list, we're already doing it. And my team doesn't have to figure out, is this scope high risk or is this scope high risk? Now, evaluation of SPD administrative compliance, right? And again, this is from the CMS Infection Control Worksheet, section 3B1. The requirements. Do we have access to the requirements? If you're doing hydrogen peroxide sterilization, you need to have the AMI document that talks about hydrogen peroxide. If you're using AERs and doing flexible scopes, you need to have that document. You need to be more familiar with CMS. One of the things that we find is our team may be familiar with AMI, may be familiar with ARN, but then they're not familiar with CMS. All of these things are required for your organization. Your policy and procedures. Some people review their policies and procedures every 3 years. I think it's better to do it on a rolling annual basis, right? So instead of, and the reason the areas that the facilities that do 3 years, they review all the policies at one time in this month-long jam it out, take time out of your job thing, instead of going, okay, this month we're going through this policy, and by the end of the year we've gone through every one of them. Because if you do it every year, it's less changes. It might be, oh, this is new evidence-based practice that we want to do. Best practices, regular updates and access to IFUs. So it's not just enough to be able to access IFUs and read them. How do we make sure that we update them? If this item used to be 4 minutes sterilization time, now it has 6 minutes, and we don't know, then now we're not in compliance with sterilization. The temperature and humidity monitoring for each area. And again, central monitoring is good, but those unofficial hygrometers are something that will help you during a survey, because if you're having an accreditation survey and you say, oh no, they monitor it centrally, and they say, okay, give me the temperature from 3 a.m. last Thursday. That's a challenge for that team to find. Whereas we can say, oh no, we monitor it every shift, right? Instrument inventory and schedule-based prioritization, and things to consider. Daily, next day instrument and implant meetings with the OR that are documented. Scheduled rounds to customers with IP, KPI reporting for identified challenges, right? Auditing SPD educational readiness. Initial and annual competencies include an objective method to verify proficiency. So whether it's a test or a return demonstration, you can't just check yourself off as being competent. Education records stored separately from performance records, and they include vendor-made initial training on all equipment in the department, whether I've been working there 2 weeks or 20 years. Competencies are job specific for SPD leaders, and SPD leaders have AMI recommended advanced certification. CMS says this, AMI says this, you can't be the manager and have the same annual competency as one of your team members. You can't have a specialty job like implant coordinator and have the same ones as your team. That doesn't mean you don't still have your annual competency as an SPD technician, because that's where it starts. But you also need to have additional competency specifically to your job. and consider AMI recommended advanced certification. Certification goal versus percentage, right? If you're in a state that doesn't require certification, that's okay. But you shouldn't just say, well, whoever's certified is certified and whoever is not. Your educator or your manager leader should have a goal to increase that percentage. Documented delivery of IP partner continuing education based on operational challenges. Listen, I love the education that you get from content providers like Beyond Clean. HSPA does a great job. But what about the things that are affecting your facility? If we're having a problem with the small frac tray, we need to have education on the small frac tray to go along with those externally provided education. So let's talk about quality programs, because this is one of the things that we've been helping facilities get from under. CMS in March 2023 made it clear that every hospital that uses Medicaid, Medicare has to have a QAPI. And specific to us in sterile processing is, what is our QAPI, Quality Assurance Process Improvement Program, for sterile processing? If you are getting an accreditation visit and you can't speak to what you're doing in quality, you are going to run the risk of having another finding that we're going to talk about, which is lack of oversight. So quick little lesson when we talk about KPI reporting, because KPIs are a part of the quality process, right? And a lot of times we all like to report the outcome. We want to report the outcome measures, right? But we also need to report the process measures. The Center for Improvement in Healthcare Quality talks about outcome measures are the end results. We want to reduce bioburden, but we also need to report the process measures. We're going to use the ultrasonic more. We're going to rate the point of use treatment. We're going to discuss how many trays we reject, how many trays we quality audit, right? So adding process measures to the communication cycle increases the appreciation and cooperation you get not only from your customers but also from your team members, right? So let's practical application with the process measures. So if I say I want to lose some weight, I start off at 242, I'm down to 236, I'm up to 240, I'm down to 234, I'm up to 2. There's no rhyme or reason. Adding process measures to our outcome measures can help, gives me a better chance of success, right? How many days did I work out in the home gym? How many days was I under 1,500 calories? How many days did I log into the fitness app? So that's an example of outcome measures and process measures that we can use. And so here are the elements of an SPD quality program. How compliant are we with instrument tracking the patients? Our instrument repair program, is it based on usage and specialty? If you are sending your general trays out the same rate that you're sending your cardiac trays, something is wrong. Don't let the vendor manage your instrument repair program. You should manage your instrument repair program, unless the vendor is going to start going up there and getting yelled at when the cardiac surgeon thinks their instruments are not of high enough quality. Missing instrument reduction activities. Missing instruments is the number one error, not bioburden, the number one error. And what are we doing to reduce that, right? And is it documented? Bioburden and foreign object alleviation strategies in every area. We talked about that earlier, using rejection versus acceptance criteria. Instrument hole mitigations. Like instrument holes, it's not one department's fault or the other one, but are we doing everything that we can to reduce those holes? Quality audits of high error trays, that's going to give you, that volume is going to give you a culture change. Quality audits of sterile storage across the organization. We talked about that. Customer feedback communication for all products. How can the customer that's in the clinic or in the operating room that's far away from sterile processing tell you, we were missing the ad center or we had this problem? So that should be a part of your count sheets and your communication process. IUSS, reduced dry time monitoring and reporting. Case delays from unprocessed instrumentation. Hand hygiene compliance between patient. IPs do good on hand hygiene, but we shouldn't be using the same gloves or the same bare hands from patient to patient. I do a cardiac tray. My next tray is ortho. I should do some kind of hand hygiene. And documented interdisciplinary, multidisciplinary meeting. So all this is to avoid the lack of oversight finding. This is a rapidly emerging survey result when the following conditions are observed during a visit: out of date, improperly referenced, or inadequate policies, repetitive issues in different departments or campuses, lack of standardization of processes and documentations in areas that produce, store, or use internally sterilized items, insufficient infection control based education, practice, and process improvement KPI reporting, insufficient CMS required vendor management documentation, absence of an effective CMS mandated QAPI program that'll get you a finding quickly, calls and complaints from facility personnel or credentialed providers to the accreditation agency. And we know that's one of those things that's happening in this modern thing. Assessors should be able to identify patterns of non-compliance for sterilization and high-level disinfection areas across the organizations and help establish programs that avoid this lack of SPD oversight. So after your survey is finished, whether it's internal or third, the assessor should provide a findings report on the day of the audit. So before they leave, you should expect them to provide that. Findings report should be sorted and scored by area based on compliance risk area. So a low risk thing shouldn't become a project before something that's a compliance problem. Findings from third-party evaluation should include standard references and recommendations to cure. So I shouldn't say, well, I said the sky is pink because that's just my opinion. We know that. If I say the sky is pink, then I should say, well, if you look at AORN guidelines for sky color, it says that the sky is pink. Assessors should be available to discuss strategies to reduce patient care and accreditation risk. Follow-up assessment rounds should be performed to fix and sustain process. And ideally, third-party assessment providers should have the ability to provide interim project assistance if needed. How can my facility be more prepared for our next accreditation survey? Think about every clinical assessment your team has been a part of and ask if they met the expectations that we shared today. Ensure that your facility has all the applicable references. Start a book club-like study of the applicable standards with accreditation, OR, IP, SPD. All these groups should be together saying, does this mean this, that kind of thing. Leverage social media for strategies and solutions. Leverage AI to gain perspective on common SPD challenges. I'm a big fan of that. Use free accreditation preparation tools to self-evaluate readiness. We're going to give you the ability to contact us if you want to use some of our free accreditation preparation. Increase the level and complexity of KPIs you expect from your SPD partners. So again, how many loads we ran a biological on, that's not enough, right? We need to get to the quality of patient care. Practice, practice, practice. And that's where the internal accreditation preparation rounds really help you get better. And contact third-party assessment experts if multiple opportunities are identified in your internal rounds. The QR code on the screen is a way to access our workshop questionnaire so that we can make sure that we answer questions that you have, right? And that the workshop met its objectives. So please use this QR. If you don't get this QR in time, please feel free. We'll email you the questionnaire. Also, if you have any questions about anything that has to do with surgical services or this presentation, please use this QR code. It'll bring you to contact me via LinkedIn, my email, Facebook, whichever method is most comfortable for you. And also be on the lookout for our next clinical workshop. It's going to be the 5 W's and H of water. It's designed to help end users use the new ST108 water program. The references are included in this program if you're interested in that. And if you would like to receive a copy, please contact us. Thank you for your time. Are there any questions that you want to ask? Our moderator is in the back. All right. Again, my name is Jhmeid Billingslea. I am just one of the great team we have at Advantage. If you have any questions about this presentation, please feel free to reach out and we'll be glad to answer questions and tell me tell me what your challenges are, and our goal is to help you with your challenges. Thank you again. I'm going through the questions and seeing